Every business needs a book, including yours. Visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com today to learn the 7 steps to publish and promote your nonfiction lead and profit-generating business book in 8 weeks. Once again, that's freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com.
Feeling great. I'm feeling great. You're my second interview of the day, but now I've got my warm ups all done and ready to dive in. Um, Multitasking a lot earlier in my career is probably a big answer to that, which I would not recommend folks do. I think the eight, honestly, I guess it depends on your aim. If you're like me and early on, I didn't realize how impactful multitasking so often so early in my career would be. It was the most accelerated form of on the job education I've ever had and wouldn't trade it for anything. But there were people who were disciplined enough to just do one thing and stick with it for over a decade. And regardless of their ability as an entrepreneur from an intellectual capacity, they were able to create phenomenal financial outcomes for themselves. So if your goal is money in the bank, oftentimes deep focus wins. If your goal is to educate yourself to do something that's earth shattering and can change the course of human history, that's a really, really big problem and you need a lot of reps to train yourself, then maybe doing more things early in your career is an enhancement. It's not for the faint of heart, though. Yeah, I would imagine so. Getting involved in an ecosystem as much as possible. I mean, even outside of the companies that I built, that the exits I can kind of take credit for to some degree. There have been others that I've built that I haven't been the founder of that have exited or gone public. There have been ones that I've been part of that I've been the founder of that haven't done anything and that have completely cratered. I'm also a mentor for some of the top accelerator programs in the world on the growth side of things. So the big Silicon Valley accelerators, I'm in basically all of them as a mentor. So being able to get involved in the ecosystem and just put yourself in a lot of different situations and see a lot of different scenarios play out. Every one of them teaches you something. Every one of them is going to make you better as an entrepreneur. And it is a rocky road, regardless of how incredible you might be. If you're pushing the boundaries and you're doing things that are worth doing, they're going to be ups and downs. But I would say maybe a secret is just continuing to frame failure as yet another learning opportunity and framing the worst case scenario as an inconclusive test. Yeah, think about it like this. I mean, when we talk about growth, a lot of people will talk about tactical things like conversion optimization, for example, which then dovetails into the scientific method. And if we look at the scientific method through just a very broad lens, it starts with a problem statement. This is exactly what is happening right now. And in a very simplistic case, let's say you're an e-com company and your visit to purchase ratio is below industry benchmarks. And if you look at that as a problem statement and your hypotheses aren't just what can we try like most people have, it's more like why is this thing happening, let's seek to understand. And your experiments are ways to validate or invalidate that understanding. Your failed tests and your successful tests are both incredibly instrumental to your success because they allow you to iterate on your understanding of your customer a lot faster. The absolute worst case scenario is an inconclusive test where you've put in a lot of effort and you haven't learned anything. So if it steers you towards the correct path, then in my opinion, it's definitely worth doing. As long as when you started doing it, you came in with the intent to learn something very specific and strategic. Yeah, Oh, I love that. Yeah, honestly, it took me a long time early in my career to find mentors. I would say I didn't grow up in a business world. I didn't have any business education or anything like that. Um, so when I did find mentors, I found that the most profound learnings I got from them were from the mentors that had had significant failures as well as significant successes. So they were humble enough to know, because of, you know, times at which they executed. Yeah, exactly. And there are always things to learn. There are things that work in some businesses and not others. And why is that? Right. And oftentimes it's because people skip modeling and strategy and they go straight to tactics because that's what's marketed to them. And the people who are marketing those things have a, yeah, they have a direct financial interest in convincing you that that's the way. So it's just not the way. Right. Right. 100%. Yeah. And I think that's, it's pointed, and I'll say a name because I wouldn't consider myself talking badly about this person. I just think it's an interesting example. You know, a big name in the space right now is Russell Brunson. Right? Russell Brunson he wants to tell the world that funnels are the way. Now, rewinding a little bit or taking a step back, funnels are a tactic, and funnels can work like with a very specific focus. Funnels by themselves, and especially specific types of funnels, are yeah, exactly. It's like very specific applications that they want you to teach, or they want you to believe are the way that you succeed. And it can be sometimes, but you won't, if they're not, you won't know why. If they are, you won't know why. And because it skips several steps. Now, obviously, he's selling a funnel product. And so he has a direct financial interest in wanting you to know that this is the way you start, this is where you end, nothing else exists, this is everything. And especially since it worked for him, he's going to passionately believe that. But if you look at some of the most prolific growth stories in the history of business, it wasn't just a funnel equation. It was a lot more, and funnels were a small piece of that puzzle. Thanks. Yes and no. I would say if you think about things from an analog perspective, I think Chamath put it really eloquently. One of the first talks I saw from him was, and he was the first head of growth at Facebook before there was a growth team on any business using that verbiage. Um, he boiled business down to three things, and I thought it was really clever. And it was, and people have opinions about him, but I thought that a lot of his knowledge was very, very good. Step one, get more people through the front door. And a lot of people focus only there, and it's a mistake. Step two, get them to their first aha moment in that customer journey as quickly as possible. And step three, continue to deliver quantifiable product value as often as possible. And if those three things are taken care of, then I think, a lot of businesses can look at what they've done as a specific type of funnel, even if they're like in the analog world. Right? If you enter a restaurant, there are going to be a certain number of people that walk in the door, and a certain number of those people are going to look at the menu to see if there's anything on it that they want to eat or can eat. Some of those people will leave, and some of those people will be seated, and different moments occur along the way. Now you can digitize that into funnel software and things along those lines, but it really is just a series of micro conversions that you're thinking in terms of taking a user on a journey to taking a set of specific actions. Some will, some won't. And I do think that the funnel verbiage, like the word funnel, is unfortunate because it really refers to a linear path. And I think most great growth stories in business do not follow a linear path. They can be seen more as like, well, let's look at two scenarios really quick. One, you have a machine that, you have pieces of that machine going along a conveyor belt, and human beings are putting together those pieces of those machines. And at the end of it, you have a bunch of machines. The assembly line, perfect analogy, right? Let's say hypothetically, though, that first machine that you build is intent on building other machines. And the second machine you build is also intent on building other machines. So every single aspect of what you're doing as a human laborer in the system ensures that every single effort spits off compounding returns. That's really the kind of quote unquote secret. That's really not a secret deep in the valley and in growth land, but it is kind of a secret in almost everywhere else in the internet marketing realm and everywhere else. So I just always found that really fascinating that was absent. And one of my books is on a very specific part of those, kind of loops, right? A lot of high level growth minds will refer to loops. And that book, Viral Hero, is all about viral loops and how customers can actually create those concentric, those compounding growth stories for you. But you can apply that same methodology in any customer journey type, whether it's inbound or outbound, whether it's paid ads and sales. Exactly. Yeah. All of those, if the economics are correct in those steps along the way, like what your targets need to be for that to be a sustainable path for your company to continue proceeding over time. Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Sure. I'll give an example here. Product that most people are familiar with in the business world is LinkedIn. Early days of LinkedIn, their model dictated they couldn't use the vast majority of channels out there. They were, essentially a niche social network. So they could only use the channels that were available to them economically, i.e. B2C virality and SEO. Like those two things had to be the way. So they had to build the product accordingly, because you can't build a product like you can't fit a channel around a product. You have to build a product for a channel, so you don't have control of the channel. So for them, they realized, okay, how can we create network effects or catalyze network effects in the system? Here's where, when we're bringing you on, you're inviting your professional network, and here's why, right? To make your status improved, which can be a direct translation into money in your pocket. In so doing, they also asked you to create a user profile and a company profile. And their company packaged, LinkedIn packaged those profiles as user-generated content that then got indexed on search. So as those network effects, when you invite your network, proliferate, and you start to see certain of those like linear channels start to work, every single user that comes into the system creates these pieces of user-generated content that get indexed. When you search for their business or you search for their name, LinkedIn will come up. As you feed more people into that system, that breadth expands so much that it compounds, and it compounds onto itself. It wasn't only until they saw that was as effective as it possibly could be that they added more, to that growth machine, in as much as they, updated their business model so they could sell like business to business tools, so they could unlock other aspects of their growth machine and like add new, superchargers to that engine, so to speak. Meaning like their sales navigator or their like business tools and their job boards and things like that. So suddenly they can have paid sales reps in the machine that batch acquires these businesses. But when they do those, and now they're enabled to do so by the economics because they're selling in mass. But as they do that, every one of those users who goes through the system still creates that user-generated content. And then they've expanded. Exactly. And if you think about YouTube through the same lens, when people think about going viral, so to speak, it's not a video that ever goes viral. It's YouTube itself that goes viral. Like you're just a viral mutation. If you think about like the flu, the reason that everyone in the world isn't vaccinated against the flu, for example, is because the flu changes every single year and different strains pop up because it's its natural survival mechanism of that entity, right? Of that organism. And so if you think about YouTube, if there was just one video on that system, everyone in the world would have been exposed to it. Everyone would have forgotten about it by now, and no one would have ever gone to YouTube again. But because of the fact that people still continue to create content on YouTube, and when they share that link or they embed the player or anything along those lines, people are still getting a new and fresh experience of YouTube every single time. So YouTube continually spreads virally, and people can kind of piggyback on that through a form of direct response marketing in creating that content that kind of piggybacks on that existing audience. But, through that lens, that is like the platform is what's the virus. And we're all just kind of the hosts, and the content we create are the mutations. Mm. Oh, absolutely. Yes, exactly. So they don't have to, right? It's cheaper. Now, think about Facebook, right? Like the platform, right? Yeah, seriously. The platform is the same. Their platform is designed to generate attention. But the mutation, you don't have the same experience in Facebook basically ever, because they've caught on to the fact that, like, for me, I'm on Instagram now. Finally, I'm actually on social media for the first time in my career, because I'm actually like trying to teach people how I've done some of this stuff. And I don't follow very many people. I only follow like cute animals and like a couple people that inspire me, and that's it. And it was very strategic because I didn't want to get caught in the addiction loop of some of the content on there. But what happens is very quickly, within like 10 seconds, my scroll is gone. And now they're showing me recommended content because they know they want to keep the viral mutations alive to give me a fresh experience every time. So through that lens, if we look at our kind of growth machines, as if we like zoom back out, if we look at our growth machines as they have to be renewable resources for us to continue growing as a business, right? They have to be expansive and compounding. Like that then unlocks a whole world of new potential product value that we can inject. It's not just a linear flow. It's not just, one of those situations where, maybe you try, like, how often do you hear it where an entrepreneur's like, I'm going to try this one method, or this company here is trying to sell me a webinar funnel, or these guys are trying to sell me like SDRs or Facebook ads or whatever. I'm going to just try everything, see if anything works, and then just, exactly. And sometimes nothing does, right? Because you haven't built your product for a channel. You don't, unless you have a growth model and a strategy, right? So like, and you can run different scenarios, you can figure out why things work and run cohesive sets of experiments to do so. And experimentation is a pretty common topic, but I still find that 95% of companies that I run into do it like very, very wrong. It's like, what are we going to test today? Let's test buttons. Let's test headlines. Cool. It's just, you're putting on a horse race in that case, right? You're not learning anything. You're just saying, we don't know how to make a decision, so we're going to do both things at once, and we're just going to choose the thing that outperforms the other thing. And that's just a bad way. What if it's the wrong thing of your audience? Or what if it succeeds and you have no idea why or how to take those learnings and put them elsewhere in your process? Or you don't know why it fails, and you can't use that learning to figure out why other aspects of your customer journey is failing. Like, that's a nightmare situation. I agree. Yeah, I mean, and I think right on the money. Yeah, totally. Even professional conversion rate optimization firms, like a lot of them still do this. So they're like, oh, we just have this, internal battery of tests that, something usually works. And they're able to, make some money in that transaction by creating a good outcome for a customer. And that's great. But the customer doesn't understand why it worked. The company that did it doesn't understand why it worked. They just knew that some things do, and when they try enough of them, they'll hit some home runs. and they'll make some money, right? Yeah, totally. I mean, that's a great example. Honestly, the worst thing that could happen for an entrepreneur is definitely an inconclusive result. Like you can't take the mountain of effort and money that you just poured into something and know exactly why it worked or it didn't. So you can't reuse it again. You have to go through that entire process again. And we wonder why so many businesses fail. Well, so Tony Hsieh, when he wrote Rest in Peace, wrote Delivering Happiness, he outlined three types of happiness. The first one, the most fleeting one, is pleasure, right? And it's what feels good. The second is passion, right above pleasure. And it's what am I thinking about? What do I enjoy thinking about a lot? And the third one that is much more difficult to achieve, and sometimes you kind of sacrifice pleasure for purpose in a lot of ways, is purpose, right? And it's what was I put on this earth to do? The first one sometimes feels the best, but lasts it's the shortest duration. Passion is right there in the middle, and then purpose is the longest form, but sometimes hardest to reach. And so I think passion has like a very specific job that it can do, and I think it's very useful to get curious enough about a specific area to do enough deep work to create great outcomes. But what I've found are some of the things that I'm passionate about. If I try to turn those into commerce, I quickly lose the passion for it because the job that I was hiring, quote unquote, that passion to do for me was to just be fun and interesting and be something else to think about during my day, and didn't necessarily translate to the reason that I was put here. Like, I love fantasy football, but if I built a fantasy football company, I would be having a conversation with myself every single day on what I'm contributing to humanity, right? I was passionate early on in my life. I was a professional athlete. I fought professionally, and I played a professional online poker. And both of those things I was really passionate about. I was obsessed with, and then eventually had a moment where I just sat down and was thinking to myself, what am I doing with my life? I'm either getting punched in the face for a living, or I'm trading money with a bunch of other nerds on the internet. Like, what am I contributing to this world? If I died today, what would I like be remembered for? And it was basically nothing. So I think it has a job to do, but shouldn't be seen as itself in a vacuum the outcome that you're hunting for. It's hard to say because I think when I was a child, I was arrogant enough to think that, I mean, there are, God, what is it, like 8 billion people on this planet, and we're here for just a very brief instant in time relative to how long other things have been around. And I had the audacity to think that I mattered enough to leave some sort of impact on humanity and change the way things are done in some capacity forever. Um, it's a blessing and a curse to still believe that today, I will say, because there are a lot of really, good businesses to be a part of, but there are ones that I have been a part of and I've left, or ones that I haven't been a part of and maybe financially I should have, or companies that I should have stuck with before selling them, and just didn't align with that level of impact and reach, and how it could potentially impact humanity. And because of that, like I just found it really difficult to give it my time. Yeah, that's where purpose comes in, right? That's if I know that I'm put if I believe deeply that I was put here to change things forever, for like somehow alter the course of human history, if I'm doing something that doesn't align with it, it becomes very, very difficult for me to focus for a prolonged period. Maybe I can get myself to do that for, yeah. Well, and honestly, it's interesting because some of the most difficult times in my career have been right after I've sold a company and the deal indicates I have to be a part of the combined entity for a specific period of time. Um, yeah, but in some sort of subordinate role, right? Where I'm like just running a business unit. And those are tricky because like I kind of have to distract myself during that window by doing other things and multitasking and so forth, because I want to distract myself away from knowing that there's a ceiling on the impact I can create and the achievements that I can reach. Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, if you think about, I like to steal an exercise from product management where it's this jobs to be done exercise. And you think about what job are you hiring your passion to do for you? And like, for example, if we look at it as a tool, if we look at passion as a tool and we kind of mimic that same analogy and say, let's say I have a hammer. This hammer has a job to do for me. It is to hammer nails in, it's to hammer like certain things together. I can't use that hammer for everything, but I do need it. Like it's an essential piece of that's it's essential tool on my tool belt. But if it's the only tool I have, then I'm going to crush a lot of things that I shouldn't have crushed. So like for me, it's a tool that is complementary with a number of others. Maybe so. That's a good a good question. Well, yeah, right. Yeah. And honestly, I mean, I think there's something to that, right? Like it's if I were to if I were to think about this through a different lens and I didn't have a hammer in that situation, like I wouldn't get very far, right? So I think it's important to have exactly, right? I think you have to have it, but you can't only have it. I think there's no exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to shatter it into a whole bunch of different pieces, maybe. So, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Hmm. Yeah. Let me grab my hammer. Sure. Yeah, let me install this like stained glass panel. Yeah, exactly. Mm. Hmm. 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 If so, it depends on where the entrepreneur is starting, right? If they have an existing business, it's a different question than if they're starting from scratch. Um, all right, so let's say it's an existing business, right? The first place that I almost always go, like from a growth perspective, is retention. Like without question, it's the foundational metric. It powers every other growth metric you have, and it's unfortunate because like retention. So the retention is a lagging indicator. You don't know if it's going to happen until it happens. So the precursor to that is engagement, right? Customer engagement. So the place that I would go if I'm an entrepreneur with an existing business is, are the customers engaging with my product to the degree, in the way, and at the frequency that our hypotheses indicated that they would. And this is what we get. We get a number that we basically refer to as the natural usage frequency of the product. So let's say you have a product like Instagram, and you've got like a natural usage frequency of like, you know, hourly active users, something like that, right? Because you have multiple uses throughout the day. You have another product on the opposite side of the spectrum. Let's say Zillow. Maybe somebody is using that to buy a house every 7 years, something like that. It's tricky there in between because in like on the Instagram side of things, your natural usage frequency of a couple hours, you can build a habit. Whereas Zillow, with their existing model of just selling homes, they cannot build a habit. Anything outside of a 1 month period is usually you have to reacquire that customer and pay to reacquire them every single time. So what they did is they basically created a few other value creation strategies within their suite of products, like their Zestimate feature, where you can see the value of homes that you don't know what they are, and they also have content that they send you, and those are both different, faster natural usage frequencies. One's monthly, one's weekly. So where I would start is engagement in the customer around what we expected when we built something versus what is actually happening, and then trying to get to the bottom of exactly why that's the case. Because every single thing that you do, if you're focusing on growth, is going to be about how do we add more value to this product, period, full stop. Everything else is a derivation of that, and it's a signal of part of that. For example, how well are we articulating our value feeds into how we can acquire customers. How often we're presenting a quantifiable view of that value goes into how we're retaining customers and how we're able to monetize those customers. So if you're thinking about things through that lens and you continue to think about things through that lens, you're on the right track. But a method through which you're able to get really, really curious about that really quickly is just through structured customer conversations. I love this book, Lean Customer Development by Cindy Alvarez. I talk about it a lot. I don't know Cindy. I may someday meet Cindy, but I've recommended her book to almost every single entrepreneur I've met, because it, like, when someone asks me if I have a new idea for a new product in an existing business or a new business, first thing I say is I try to forget it because it's my idea. And what I've found to be true is oftentimes when we as entrepreneurs act on our own ideas that we just are convinced are good ideas, it's just so much more likely to fail because of the fact that those ideas have not directly come from an unbiased look at customer information. If, however, instead we do 20 or 30 structured interviews with no idea, and the job that we hire that idea to do for us is bring us to the table and get us interested in a specific type of customer, interested enough to have a specific set of conversations. And through that lens, if we're able to have 20 or 30 of those structured conversations that are strategically architected to not lead the witness, we're paying attention suddenly to what the user is saying the problem is, what the magnitude of the problem is in terms of value, how they're describing the problem, where they're telling us they would look for a solution to the problem. All of a sudden, I have all the answers. I know where I'm going to market. I know what my sales copy is going to be. I know what outcome the product has to create. I know exactly how they're describing the experience with the product. I know how much they would pay for the product and the value it would create for them. Like, I'm getting all of those clues. I'm not having to make any arbitrary decisions that are based on random information that's unrelated and not causal. So through that lens, I would say like that's the biggest hack for both of the existing and the new entrepreneur. Um, you definitely want to build your growth model without question. It's one of the things that we do at GrowthTeam.ai is we build growth models for companies. We train people as growth leads to place within companies that need growth leadership and so forth. So we place people that are trained in our methods with our tools, creating compounding exponential outcomes. We have a process for every single decision that could potentially be made. If you're experiencing X, then do Y. If you're experiencing A, then do B, et cetera, et cetera. So like if you don't have a growth model and your strategy hasn't been birthed from that growth model, if you're skipping straight to tactics, you're just gambling at that point in time. And I've done that in my career, like before I was able to discover this sort of thing, which professionally, yeah, you're gambling with your entire business, with your livelihood. You might not think you are, but you absolutely are, because a lot of these tools that, are being marketed to us as potential solutions to these problems. First of all, the people that are serving me those ads have a direct financial interest in me seeing them, right? Because every single click gets money in their pocket. Now, those entrepreneurs that are posting those ads have a direct financial interest in me thinking that that's the truth. I need to see numbers. I need to make sure that I know, based on everything that I know about my market, my model, my product, my channel, like all those four things have to fit together. It's not just product market fit. Like you have to look at market, model, channel, products, right? All those things have to fit together in a very, very specific way and have to enable one another. And through that lens, I get an instructive view of what the path needs to be. With a growth model, you know to what degree every single step in your loops have to perform. And you get an example of how to generate different scenarios such that, okay, if I generate a 10% improvement on one of these steps, which step would I need to focus on to generate me the most profound returns at the end of the year? Like you have an instructive deterministic system that allows you to do that. And so you have very, very clear whys behind your actions. It's not just, let's just try this thing because it worked for this other company. You have like blinders that you can put on and you can actually answer the question, how does this company grow? Right? I can actually answer that question now. And everyone in my organization can answer that question very, very clearly. And when they have that specificity, if you have other people in your organization, suddenly you're actually utilizing everyone's full creative potential because they know, like Jocko Willink in Extreme Ownership calls it commander's intent. And that's like super applicable to business because things move so quickly that you have to adapt on the fly. And if you don't give people the lens through which to see the world in that context, they're going to be robots and you're going to die. So um, makes everything more succinct. It makes everything more specific. You know exactly why you're doing everything you're doing, to what degree, how fast the customer needs to follow the specific process. Like for example, an example here is I hear a lot of folks, let's say in ecom, they talk about the CAC to LTV ratio, customer acquisition cost to lifetime value ratio. Bad metric to look at because of the fact there's no time box, right? So if you have your CAC to LTV and let's say it's 10-1, if you have this other company over here and it's 5-1, but your 10-1 CAC to LTV happens over the course of a year, and the 5-1 CAC to LTV happens over the course of 3 months, I'm taking company B every single time because that loop can compound 4 times before this one completes once, right? And like that's the exponent in the equation, the cycle time. So all these things need to be accounted for. Otherwise, we're just randomly trying things. Some of them are with varying degrees of knowledge, and some of them are just flat out guesses. But to some degree, you're still just playing a probability game. Well, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes, it's funny. Like there are certain things that click with us at moments in time, whether I'm listening to a book or watching a show or something like that, and someone will say something and it'll just click. And I've heard the other day there were two reasons that click moment occurs, and either one, it take something that's been kind of murky in your brain that you've known to be true, but someone is able to put it in words in a way that really boils it down and makes sense immediately. And the other one is someone says something that immediately challenges and counteracts a belief that I've held for a long time that's just wrong. Right. And so I'm hoping that listeners are able to hear some of this and know in advance, by the way, listeners, like I didn't just happen upon this knowledge. Like I've spent like, oh yeah, I mean, all all those, yeah, I mean, all those plus a 500 plus Audible library, and there's other shelves in this room, but it's also 15 years in entrepreneurship, trying so many different things, failing. I've gone broke a couple times once I was like $1 million in the hole because I took such a big swing and bootstrapped. Was able to climb back. But then after that, just, getting involved in the ecosystem to the degree that you're seeing every single possible derivation of any problem and the consequences of doing things wrong. And also, like, I've tried to then get as much out of academia as well. So like 2 graduate degrees, one pending doctorate, like all those things. I'm still a beginner in so many of these areas that I'm trying to find connections in. But if I'm able to kind of well, there are a lot of these areas that I've been able to centralize my focus in, but like every single conversation that I get to have with really, really smart entrepreneurs, I'm learning various ways to iterate on the kind of playbook that I've been able to build that we can now give companies that we work with. Thanks. Yeah, it's honestly the biggest consequence I've felt early on in my career, probably halfway through my career at this point in time. I found that one of the biggest breaking points for me was after my fifth exit. I mentioned it briefly that I went like over $1 million in the hole and kind of wiped the slate clean on my entire net worth, after that many years. And I had to start from scratch, below scratch. Right. And a big reason why was because I had gotten off on this thought that I was becoming an authority and more of a guru rather than a perpetual student. And that was like the vow that I made to myself in that moment. Like, I will never give up the role of being a beginner ever again. I'm always going to just be the person that's asking all the questions. Why? Tell me more about this. Tell me how this works, et cetera, et cetera. And even when I feel like my resume is like amazing, I don't want to get out of that seat. Like it's only been this year that I actually like allowed myself to go out and start kind of imparting some knowledge onto others again, because there was like a fear there for a while that the impact I was making that for them would feel so good that I would shut off the beginner's mindset in myself. Like that's when we get into the pleasure, right? From the 3 levels of happiness. Mm, yeah, there's a lot of that. Oh wow. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Thank you, man. Much appreciated. Much appreciated. So right. Much appreciated. That, I mean, that really is it at the end of the day. Honestly, being able to, and then, trying to kind of take an approach where I want for any mastermind I go to or anything like that. Like for example, I have a group. It's like an invite only group of like high growth CEOs, and it's kind of like a goal setting and accountability and also a collaboration group. It's not really a business at this point. We do charge a little money for it here and there, but basically the goal is for we boil down big time annual goals down into monthly, down into weekly, And then we kind of post about them and share them with each other. And then at the end of the week, share our progress, etc. And one of the items on everyone's list has to be helping someone with one of theirs, right? And through that container, like I've tried to take that with me where, if I'm imparting some wisdom from somebody, I also want to keep my ears really open, because no matter who that person is, there's something that they're going to be able to teach me without question. And then I can use that in a completely different setting, or iterate upon my knowledge, or even try something that maybe they thought was successful in one setting but wasn't in another setting, and that learning becomes such a huge unlock for me. So yeah, I think you're definitely on the right track there. It's like a giant video game, man. Mhm. Sure. There's actually an author, by the way, if you're into gamification. I want to say it's Gabe Zickerman is his name, and he has a book, Gamification Revolution, Gamification by Design, Game-Based Marketing, and he's able to actually boil that principle down into like product value. His talks on YouTube, he gave a talk to Google, I want to say, that's on YouTube somewhere, and it just melts your face, the kinds of ways that this guy, Gabe Zickerman, just a genius guy. His whole shtick is all gamification. So, taking the Super Mario analogy and transforming it into product management or buyer psychology, or all these different areas that can be applicable to growing anything. And it's just a really fun sort of thing to dive into, because you start to see all the connections that you wouldn't have otherwise spotted. Sure. Yes, yes, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. Yeah. And yeah, totally. I think on that note as well, there's something that you said that like kind of is a good reminder. The most common structure in business right now is that silo-based approach, right? Where you have different business units responsible for specific metrics in the business. Brian Balfour, the former VP of growth at HubSpot, now the CEO at Reforge, he uses this concept of a trade-off metric, which is such a killer for silo-based companies, where you have, like, let's say a marketer who's accountable for leads in, and you have a sales team that's accountable for deals closed, and you have a product team accountable for shipping features as quickly as possible. And with that model, there's basically you're creating an artificial ceiling on how quickly you can grow, because you're prohibiting cross-functional learning, and you're also prohibiting cross-functional achievement. Let's say, for example, if I'm the marketing director, I know my incentives are tied to the number of leads in. So I'm going to do a lot of different things to get that number up, and sacrifice other metrics from other business units downstream, because of the fact that, that's what my job is, right? And the same thing for sales. Like, I'm going to close as many deals as I can, regardless of how well their use cases fit the value we create, because that's how I get paid, right? And the same thing is true across the board. If we were instead all after one single metric together, and our incentives were aligned around our ability to understand and create those specific outcomes, it's a completely different structure to run the business. And you're not having, like, you're acknowledging the trade-off metrics that can occur. Like, I don't want to sacrifice leads in for reduced sales or for increased sales velocity, or I don't want to sacrifice deals closed for retained revenue. Like having worse churn figures is going to prohibit me from being able to raise money at the correct terms. Like all those different things, by doing one thing and saying, we're going to lift this metric because we have a whole team accountable for it. Like it is the lazy approach. People don't realize it's the lazy approach, but intellectually speaking, it's not the way, right? So like that's one of those things. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Yep, we don't do that piece. And like, for example, if you ever have had a tech company, you have engineers. More often than not, like the engineers are going to do things or not do things depending on how much work it is, right? It's just too much work. Like we're not gonna be able to do that. All right. Well, if I'm aligning, yeah. Well, if I'm aligning all of our incentives around a very specific metric, and we can see clearly that one of the ways to do that, to achieve that, is with a really specific feature, which is more often than not the case, but let's say it is, that engineer suddenly has a why. They're not just being told to do something because like that's what the CEO said or the director of product heard from the director of sales. It is in alignment with creating more product value for the customer and being able to like actually like share in the value creation process. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, and that's one of the most often things that we run up against at GrowthTeam is actually smaller companies that want to utilize us. We oftentimes have to tell them, hey, the structure of your business is currently broken because, like, for example, they may have employed two or three third-party agencies. Well, those are deeper and more thick-walled silos than even the ones that you've created in your business, because their success metric is keeping you happy and paying. They don't necessarily care about the outcomes they're driving for you or the learnings that you're delivering. Let's say, for example, you outsource your advertising. How often do you think that those people are sharing the learnings on what impacts and what drives that customer, for your customer service team or for your product team or for the team that's in charge of financial modeling? Like they're not. They're keeping as much of it as a well, and they're keeping as much of it as a black box as they can, so you remain as reliant on them as possible, right? Like they don't want to give away their secret sauce, which is their understanding of the customer. Um, so all those things kind of go counter to what the outcome that the CEO or the founder wants to drive. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, totally. So there's been one really useful tool for me when like I've found over the last several years, building businesses early on, especially bootstrapped. Um, and so we'll think about it in terms of like steps in the process, right? If you want to start a customer success team, for example, and you have nothing, like that's the very first entry point into the journey. And if like the second step, right, is you have an in-house hire that's running a team. The question becomes, how do you get to that reality? And what I've often done is I've actually hired agencies to do a very different job rather than driving outcomes. I've actually hired them to say, hey, we're going to hire you for this period of time. But when we hire you, we want full visibility into the operational processes that you have such that we can begin to make progress. I can bring in a hire to start to run the process that you're driving, and then we can compile pieces of our team around that pre-existing process, push you off to the side, use you as like an advisor here and there for a little bit of money, But then we've created that bridge without, because otherwise your outcome is you go from nothing to full-time hire. That full-time hire has to build a process from scratch. During that 6-month period, you're making no progress whatsoever, and you're probably not going to knock it out of the park with that first process anyway. So I think agencies can be used for a bridge strategy in that regard. But everything else, if you're just trying to like outsource, like if you're trying to outsource that entire business unit, you're actually abdicating as a leader. You're not actually like leading in that case. You're just saying, this is something I don't want to focus on, so I'm just going to throw money at this problem, and you're going to pay the tax for that. Yeah, we always hear it. Like we always hear that they don't want to share it, and that's just not their normal process. And we say, hey, this is specifically what we're trying to achieve. Like I'll just let them know from with no uncertain terms, we eventually want to graduate from you guys. We want to build our own team, but I don't want to give up 6 months of productivity. So we can either do it with you, and I'm happy to be NDA'd and not like go sell your process to other people. That's not our business. We just want to make sure that we're able to use you guys in a very specific way so that we can kind of graduate from you and bring the effort in house and get 100% full time focus. Because the problem with those agencies, they're really, really good at this one specific tactic. And if you know, based on your model and your strategy, that tactic is right for you, having that agency, you're only getting fractional focus. So, like, you won't get the depth and immersion into your business and your mind share that you want to buy. Um, so that's like an issue that you can run up against in any agency work at all. So being able to acknowledge that and say, what else can we get from that? That's an asset. And if that asset is pre-built process, pre-trained team members, pre-configured tools that we can then start to buy, like, borrow from and learn from and implement, as we phase in our full-time team, that's the way to go, in my opinion. Sure. Well, that's very, very nice of you to say. So I grew up in a really hyper masculine culture in the Midwest, in Eastern Iowa. Being smart was not socially rewarded at all. So I did not acknowledge that part of myself for a long time. Um, and just got involved in sports because that was like the key to the top of the social hierarchy as a kid. And that was really the only thing that mattered to me at the time was, for whatever reason, that was important to me. So that was what I wanted to engineer an outcome in. And so, took that path and kind of pretended that I didn't know the things that I know, and didn't even really explore and try to learn things a whole heck of a lot because I was just like, I was convinced that there was a different way. Like this other way was not something that I wanted. If we think about what we're exposed to, TV and movies and things like that, as kids, um, the athletes are almost always the heroes, and like they're like smart people that are the supporting cast members that are like nerds and almost are always never brave and things like that. And yeah, so it was not something that was case modeled for me as something that I wanted. All my heroes were in sports or in, something else, and never in entrepreneurship. I didn't even think that it was an option. So it wasn't until, so I went to college to play football, popped my Achilles tendon, it tore completely, rolled up my leg, was not ready to be done with sports. So that's when I got into poker and mixed martial arts, because I had been boxing since I was 12 and moved to Thailand and did that. And um, but I hated it, and I hated every aspect of athletics as well. And I didn't realize it until like just a very specific moment in time where I had the opportunity to go have like a big fight with, a guy that ended up years from then ended up being a UFC champion. And I was afraid, like, just there's no shame around me saying it. Like I had seen this guy fight, and I'm like, there's just no way I'm going to beat this guy. Like, he is an absolute freak of nature. And I'm just some guy, right? Like, I know things about the sport and I'm like a decent athlete, but I'm not at this level. And it just started to make me question, like, hey, I'm not thinking like I think I should in this realm. Like, is this really for me? Maybe there's a different path. And one of my mentors in the sport at the time, like I had the opportunity to go to grad school to get my first master's degree, and he was like, "Go to grad school? Are you kidding me? Like, why would you be doing this? Like, look at where we are. Like, this is not what if any of us had the opportunity to do some of the things that you have the opportunity to do, go, like, do those things." So that was a wake up call in a moment where I'm like, this person who I look up to as this like alpha male figure that's like very famous, I am like getting this advice to do this thing that I didn't think ever this person would say I should do. Um, I did get some validation later on down the way that like I actually, I went and got like my Mensa card and stuff like that. Just there's no utility in that whatsoever. By the way, don't do it. It's really dumb. Um, yeah, like I have it, and you get like a little brochure every month of like weird like word searches, and somebody's doing a lecture on string theory, and someone else is doing a lecture on knitting, and it's just a very strange community. But like it served one purpose, and that was like I could lean in. I just wanted to know if I was as clever as I thought I was. That was the question that I had. And so when I learned that, I'm like, I need to actually like become okay with who I am, and like embrace this side of myself and just start to actually like put some energy into learning things. And it was the first time that I actually, did that, because I never went to class really in school or in grad school and just got good grades, never went to the library. So the long-winded answer to your question is no. I did not feel this way about myself. To some degree, I still think I have so much more to learn, but I'm starting to, thankfully, because of the uniqueness of the journey that I've been on, have been able to piece it all together through a specific lens and a specific methodology. And hopefully I can share that with other people. Amazing. Long time ago. Oh, yeah, there you go. Hockey. I mean, I think those guys are crazy. So that's di- di- different areas, man. So there you go. Sure. True. Okay. Let's go with yellow. Nice. Sounds good. Gotcha. 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 Sounds good. Well, so the first one, Rounders, is my favorite movie, I would say. And then on my desk, I mean, love it, love it, just classic. Um, on my desk, there's no food, but usually, um, like if it depends on the time of day, man. Like the first 90% of the day, I have more discipline than any human on earth. And the last 10%, I have less discipline than any human on earth. So it really depends on the time of day that you ask me. But usually when I have willpower, it's, meat, veggies, rice, egg whites, things like that. And then the last 10% of the day, all bets are off. It's like M&Ms and all sorts of crap. So peanut, definitely. Like, and I oftentimes will, and my wife is just like, God, there's like red 40 in that stuff, and like, don't do it. So I'm trying to all sorts of different crap that I'm now trying to attempt. Yes, yes, exactly. And And I know that all the people that are in like the wellness field would skewer me for this because that was kind of like my professional identity for a while, but that's the real truth, everybody. So well, I mean, honestly, that I would, but yeah, the M&Ms are actually kind of strategic because they come in like the little chunks, and so I can kind of like make them last a little longer. If they're things like Oreos or things like that, they're all gone. Like you can't have a box of cereal in this house for more than 6 hours. So we just don't have it around here. Almond milk because my wife is lactose intolerant, so like I don't really mind. I'm a fan of like um, I do whey protein, for example. Like milk is like the most bioavailable protein source in nature, but it does cause some inflammation. So you kind of have to counteract that in various ways. So trade-offs.
Every business needs a book, including yours. Visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com today to learn the 7 steps to publish and promote your nonfiction lead and profit-generating business book in 8 weeks. Once again, that's freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com.
I am, yes. Um, Getting as close to the customer as you possibly can. Not having a self-imposed delay of gratification. Measure twice, cut once, but most people just want to cut. They want results instantly. They don't want to go through the process to get them. And what I would recommend is just get super curious, because the path to wealth is definitely a deep understanding of the customer and their life story and what makes them feel things. True. Yes, absolutely. Um, so in my opinion, the best way to maximize lifetime value is obviously just to charge more. Like that's the fastest path, is to find value that the existing audience wants, that they're coming to you for, and augment it as much as possible. If your North Star metric is specific customer outcomes through that lens, I try to liken it to a treasure map. If you can define what X is on the map, and X is like, I mean, the easiest sale for me to make for you is like, here's $20. I'm going to sell it to you for a dollar bill. You're going to take that deal all day long. And now if I can take that $20 bill and I can bury it somewhere in this room, and I can draw you a map to it, and then I'm going to just be there with you, guiding you by the hand to that map, and I'm going to sell you that map for $5, like you're going to pay that, right? So if you can architect your customer journey in a very similar way, and just more rigorously and deliberately quantifying the value, like the monetary value you're creating for the customer, even if it's indirectly, like you're going to be able to charge more and monetize that customer more deeply. More often than not, the customer's perceived price and perceived value aren't indicative of reality. It's just down to how you've articulated both. Yeah, yeah, and I would say there's one other piece of that as well, is choosing the best customers. I mean, first and foremost, don't market to broke people. I'm not saying that broke people don't deserve to have solutions. I'm just saying that if they can't afford to pay you, you can't build a business around it. It's a fact, right? So like, first things first, you need to find a customer that is ravenously like hungry for what you have, and say no to every other customer type, and just more deeply serve that customer, as much as you possibly can. It's the time you spend on the 20% of customers that generate 80% of your value, is the most precious time you have, and the other 80% is almost a waste. So niches equal riches is the saying that I always like here. Um, so, I mentioned one, lean customer development with Cindy Alvarez. I know we've briefly touched on Mind Viral Hero. So I'll skip those. I love extreme ownership. I remember the moment that I listened to that book for the first time. And I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. It turned my world upside down in terms of like my entire life, essentially. There are other books that I really love for very specific things. Love Patrick Lencioni's books just because of the fact that they're all really easy to read. He does a great job getting you emotionally invested in the lessons because of the fact that it's in fable format. Um, if you want inspiration, there are a couple books that I love. I loved Arnold Schwarzenegger's memoirs that I read recently. There's a book by a friend of mine, Alex Benayan, called The Third Door, which is incredible. And he just is a phenomenal storyteller. But at the end of the day, like, it all comes down to Robert Greene for me. Like, he's my favorite author by far. 48 Laws of Power, the 50th Law I loved, with the one he co-authored with 50 Cent. Mastery I thought was stellar. 33 Strategies of War was great. Art of Seduction, I thought it was fine, but it kind of got him to what he was doing a little bit after the fact, which was then 48 Laws of Power. So all of Robert Greene's stuff, I think, are just thought-provoking philosophies, and then anything and everything Stoicism. Audiobook for sure. I'm almost I would say like 80% of the time. Sometimes I'll do both at the same time, and I'll have an audiobook while I read the physical book, but I usually do that on a second read. I kind of have a system that I use. Like, I listen to audiobooks on like 2.2x speed. And if I listen to it once and, I didn't learn a tremendous amount, I'll move on. But if there was a lot of really good stuff there, and maybe some of it was difficult to understand, like, I'll go back and I'll give it a second read slower with the physical book. So the books that you see on the shelf are the ones that I did that with, and the ones in this room. And like, for example, I remember the first time I read like The Wealth of Nations, like Adam Smith, right? Or the first time that I tried to listen to Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Very long, dense read. You're not going to get all the value from that book until you've like read it 10 times, So, and then another one, I think, like Don Beck and his work in Spiral Dynamics, just the most thought-provoking view of the world in terms of like a value-based system. Oftentimes we talk about things like demographics and psychographics, but if you get into Spiral Dynamics, it's a rabbit hole that it's one of those reads where you're like, okay, I need to retrace my entire life right now. Like, and so those kinds of things I think are so instructive in terms of the way that I view the world. And then, you can go down any single rabbit hole if you're like, what's the best book for X or Y or Z? Like, that's a cue that I could probably go down a pretty deep rabbit hole on. Aside from mine, yes, I would say so. Like, most of these have been at least a second read. I'm trying to think if there are any around here that I haven't listened to yet. There might be, honestly, one or two here that don't have an audiobook associated with them, but most of them, yes. Like, and honestly, it comes at a price. A lot of people love music. I'm always listening to words. Like, I'll only listen to music if I very strategically wanted to get a very specific emotion planted in my mind. If I need energy, if I want to mellow out, like, I'll use music strategically. A lot of people just love music, and like, please be that person. The world needs that. But for me, I'm only listening to audiobooks and podcasts like 100% of the time. Love it. Love it. I have a piano right next to me, actually. Like literally, I can just turn my chair and start to play. So I'm right there with you. My pleasure. Yeah, looking forward to it.